Great. So let me do a brief introduction to the authors. Fantastic book. Zjaen was very kind to share some of his the beta book with me, and I've spent the last 3 days trying to read as much as possible. So we have Zjaen Coetzee, who's a data strategist, business advisor. I know he did a lot of work in telecom. That's sort of where we met. Did a fantastic job there, and actively seeking to empower businesses to use their data more effectively to realize business value. Over 15 years of experience in IT, data, and business transformation. Karl Dinkelmann is a co-founder and CEO of Nexus Data, a data analytics consulting company. Nearly 20 years of experience in data analytics and associated fields. Okay, so those are our authors, and maybe if I can just start, Zjaen and Karl, why did you decide to write this book? What made you write it? I know data value is the big buzzword. What were your reasons for starting the book?
Zjaen, you want to go?
Yeah, let me go first. I mean, I think for me the main driver was, I mean, we've been involved with data and data valuation and data value for many years, but it's always been predominantly from the data side. So we as data leaders tend not to understand the value drivers and the financial drivers of organizations, and because of that, we typically don't speak the language of the CFOs and the CEOs like we're supposed to. And I think from what we've seen over the years, the internal work that I've done as well as work for customers is that divide is quite significant. And we wanted to provide a guide to business leaders to sort of, you know, breach that gap where let's say the business leaders, the rest of the CXO community know how to get value from data, and also what they need to focus on in terms of working with their data teams. I think that's for me the main driver, and then hopefully solving a bigger problem at scale, right? So not just the one or two companies, but we really trying to. I mean, we sort of speak about two cohorts. The one is the 1%ers, and these are the companies that just have the budget. They have the mandate, they have the support, they have the skills to get a lot of stuff out of data, and they've made that a priority. And then there's the other 99% that we deal with quite often, and those guys don't know where to start, they don't know what to focus on. So we've decided to develop a methodology based on work that we've done over the years, and then obviously from this create a bunch of frameworks that business leaders can then use to help them sort of, you know, not just extract value from data, but do that a bit more rapidly. And you'll see the rapidly, sort of pun intended, we actually call the methodology the RAPPID framework. And doing that with confidence, you know, to develop data confident leaders within organizations.
Yeah, Howard, from my side, I qualified as a CA back in 2008, and I often asked myself for years after that, why did you do this, Carl? You just went straight into IT and data, and kind of never ratified this reason. And over the years, I discovered that that this is actually something that I need to get stuck into. And so when Zjaen and I were talking about this a couple of months ago, I realized that there's this hang up that data folk have around the interaction with the CFO.
Yeah.
And that hang up is really about the world getting stuck on data asset value and kind of valuing data at rest, where in general, the CFO doesn't really care about that, because even if you go back to the accounting standards, which I studied back in 2002, 3, 4, it actually says, if you go read the International Financial Reporting Standard, it defines an asset as something that has value, but that value is qualified by the future economic benefits that can be extracted from it, right? So even the CFO, even the Financial Reporting Standard shows that the CFO doesn't care about the value of the data at rest as much as what he cares about what value can be extracted out of it from in the future, right? But in order to do that, you have to have certain disciplines and practices in place. And we'll get stuck into that in the meat of the discussion, but that kind of really formed the basis for my desire to write this book with Zjaen. And yeah, for me, it's really a coming together of the two disciplines, the financial studies and qualification with the data and IT experience.
Yeah, thanks, Carla. I really think that's an important point you bring up. And just that relationship is important. We will go on to another discussion question a little bit later. Just wanted to share with everybody that as we do with all the other authors, we will be providing a free copy of the book to the person that asks maybe the hardest question or the most interesting question. and Zjaen and Carl will vote and tell us who did the best job at the end. Carl, I'm not sure when it will be out. Your estimate time, so we'll just have to put a position in there, and when it comes out, we'll make sure that they get a copy.
Awesome.
Fantastic. All right. So the next question is, and please, if you'd like to put your questions in the chat, and I'll keep a look on that. And when we get to the end of the interview, then we'll dip into some of your questions. Okay. So the next question is, what is the promise of the book? Why should people read it? What are you trying to achieve?
Can I take this one, Zjaen?
Yeah.
Howard, you should also point to who you want, but I think Zjaen and I
Okay.
we have a good flow going here. So this diagram that you see in front of you really encapsulates that the answer to that question: what is the promise to the book, and why should people read the book? What we looked at is what is the typical journey that organizations go through. So we started out by saying, well, everybody starts in a primitive state, which basically means, your value from data analytics is restricted, and this is where you're doing Excel-based reporting, manual analysis, etc. Right? And then a board wakes up or an exco wakes up and says we need to be investing in data analytics, and so that the minute that decision is made and that first step is taken, typically that looks like. Zjaen and I have a debate about this. We settled on anything more than 2 people in a data analytics function, then looks like the journey is kicked off, right? And that pushes an organization into what we call a transitional stage. But the problem with the transitional stage is everybody has to go through it, but you lack structure. The maintenance is high. There's not much value coming out of all the effort you're putting in. It's not nice to be there. It's not lekker to be there for all the South Africans, right?
Yes.
And the main issue is that your value is questioned, right? Now, the challenge is that many organizations get stuck in the transitional stage. And this is where organizations start asking questions like, is data analytics really for us? Why does it not work for us the same as what it works from what we are at conferences or at events? Or I'm Brian with my CEO mate, and he's telling me they're killing it with data analytics. What is it? The issue is that you're stuck in the transitional stage, right? In the strategic stage, this is where value is driven. And so there's much more innovation. You're adding a lot of value. There's consistency in the delivery. It's just much healthier and more beneficial to be there. And what the book contains is simply the secrets to help you get unstuck. So how do you move from the transitional stage or through the transitional stage in record time straight to the strategic stage? And it takes a bit of time. It's not that easy, but it contains all the secrets you need. The game-changing stage is what organizations do that are basically born into data. So the Ubers, the Airbnbs, etc. They started out their journey with data at the foundation, and they made that their business model. The book doesn't cover the game-changing stage. That's not the target. The book is to help people go through the transitional as quickly as possible into the strategic, where you can really start showing some great value as an organization through data analytics.
Fantastic. Thanks, Carl. Great answer. Zjaen, if I could ask you, and I know you've done a lot of this, so why should companies leverage data analytics, and how can they do that?
Yeah, the simple answer there is if you don't, I don't see your company surviving.
Right.
And it sounds harsh, but it's the truth, right? And I mean, it's if we look at any organization of any size, if you are a barber in a corner shop, or if you're running a cafe, or you're running taxi services, whatever it might be, even at that mundane level, data is quite important. You need to understand, what's the traffic volume coming into your area where they're actually buying services from you, consuming those services. You need to know what sells, what doesn't sell. So to remain, if you want to do stock levels, all those type of things. I think many companies have not gotten to the point where they're truly unlocking value and gaining that competitive advantage. And the scary thing is, I think in the data world in general, what we're currently seeing is people are very risk adverse. So they're not really willing to sort of break through that wall of the transitional phase, because they're scared for many reasons. And we believe that that's predominantly due to a lack of confidence from business leaders. And I think what really needs to happen is business leaders almost need to gain that confidence, but on the other side of it is to identify opportunities to generate value from data and analytics, and then build out a roadmap what that looks like for them. And I think if they can do that, they will be successful. And it's not a should you or should you be doing analytics? You should be doing it. I think it's finding those niche use cases, and one of the areas I think, maybe just come to back to that point around why they should be leveraging analytics, is it needs to add business value. And that doesn't necessarily always mean operational efficiency like we used to, right? It needs to come down to rands and cents and dollars. Because the current landscape we're in is very competitive. There are a lot of companies doing this from day one, sort of the digital and the data natives. And for traditional companies, it becomes more and more difficult to actively compete in environments if they don't do this.
Okay, great. And I know when we met in the beginning, you were doing some tracking around the COVID. So that's almost for governments. How does that apply into the government sector as well? So that's not about competing maybe against other countries, but what is their driver?
Yeah, I mean, it's for them. For them, it comes back to value as well, right? It's they have limited resources and they need to apply that in the right context. We've done a significant amount of work for government. I think the COVID Connect one was probably the biggest government project that we worked on. I can remember it very well on the 22nd of March, 2020. I was in the gym when we got the call from the Minister of Health to say, listen, we have 2 weeks to develop a solution, because they need to do contact tracing. But once you start spending time with them, they don't really have any different, how can I put this, KPIs and measures than you would expect in even a private organization. They also need to make money. They have limited resources that they need to apply. So obviously, whatever they're getting from funding perspective, they can only deploy in certain areas, and they need to decide where to best do that. And I can tell you, we saw the transformative value that data had, for organizations like that. And I think our government is, with a lot of the work we're doing, is we can see that there's a lot of that shift happening, and it's going to sound really bad, but it feels like the government is surpassing some of the private organizations in terms of focusing on data analytics. They're hiring really strong business leaders as well, with sort of data first mindsets, that come in with that operational efficiency and view of making money, reducing cost to a greater extent, and just being lean organizations. And yeah, I mean, it's a fun world to find yourself in, because you can really see the value coming out of it.
Fantastic. Okay, Carl, how can companies identify opportunities to generate value through data analytics? Is there a process? Is there a recipe? Is there just, this sounds like a good idea?
There's absolutely a process and a recipe, Howard. Before I get into that, I just want to touch on something that we came across in the book. Actually, Zjaen and I met at an event where we had introduced this concept, and I was sitting next to Zjaen. He was a guest at the event, and we introduced this concept of a determinate value versus indeterminate value, right? So a lot of what data analytics functions are doing today is generating indeterminate value. So what is indeterminate value? Well, it's just tangible value that's incredibly difficult to measure, right? So if we're developing a business performance dashboard for the CFO, for example, how do you measure the actual value of that? That's really difficult. You need some pretty good statistical knowledge to generate a measurement of that value. It'll probably cost you more to measure the value than what it costs to build the dashboard itself, right?
Sure.
And so I introduced this concept at the event, and I said to the people around the table, you know, what would you call, what do you think indeterminate value is? And without breaking a sweat, Zjaen just said, well, it's all these dashboards we're developing. And I thought, wow, I thought we're the only ones that use this term, but Zjaen had obviously been doing some thinking around that as well. The opposite of that is determinate value, which is really where you want to focus on as a data analytics function. This is the stuff that's obvious to measure. This is when I can help to sell more. This is when I can retain customers. This is when I can do some revenue assurance and actually maximize my revenue through, you know, whatever we're entitled to contractually. And so that's what the identification of opportunities needs to be focused on, identifying things that are determinate value generating, instead of getting caught up as the data analytics function and getting bullied by the business into only focusing on indeterminate value. Even if the business and business leaders are pushing that sort of directive to the data analytics function, you're still going to end up in the position where the value is going to be questioned, right? And so there's the prerogative on the in the company to start looking at determinate value exercises. And there's a whole range of, there's a whole recipe that we recommend in the book that we call demand consolidation, which is an exercise to go through the organization step by step and discover what are these opportunities to generate value. But it really comes down to, can the business and the data leadership come together to do a proper evaluation, a proper study of what should we be doing as an organization to be able to, firstly, keep up with our competitors. So that's a good place to start. Have a look at what your competitors are doing. What's the norm in our industry, right? So if you have any form of annuity revenue in your organization and you're not doing a revenue assurance model and you don't have a customer churn analytics model, that's a very good place to start. That's good low-hanging fruit, right? So that's kind of standard things. You need to identify those. They're good determinate value generators, and you build up this demand consolidation list that then becomes part of your process to prioritize with stakeholders so that you know what you want to invest in first.
Okay. And how do you deal with the sort of side issues like data literacy and knowledge management and stuff like that? Because they're also going to chew up time and they're going to chew up resources. How do they get scheduled into this?
Yeah. Can I take this, Zjaen?
Yep.
Yeah. So I think Howard, it's a, you know, the data analytics journey is the seesaw, right?
Yeah.
You can move fast and generate value quickly. And you don't need any foundational stuff in order to do that. You don't really need literacy. You don't need any. You got 3 projects you want to do. You want to quickly churn out a revenue assurance model. You want to build you can make an impact, right? The challenge that you get to is, as the journey becomes more and more complex, you start facing barriers, right? So we wrote about this issue. It's like going on a trip with your family, right? And then you have this, single family trip. We're driving down to Cape Town. Hey, that's great. That's pretty easy. You don't really need much in terms of organizing, right?
Yeah.
But as soon as you add 2 or 3 families to that trip, you're going to start having to think about things like, well, maybe we need some 2-way radios so we can communicate. Maybe we need a project manager between the families so we can determine which route we're going to follow, right? Now, what a lot of organizations don't realize is that their data analytics journey isn't 2 or 3 families that are traveling together. It's like a massive logistics company that runs hundreds of trips every day with thousands of vehicles operating in sync. And so that's where the wheels fall off, because we don't have enough 2-way radios. We don't have a project manager in place, right? And then we get caught up with this issue that we now have to lift the foundations or lift the house that we've built without foundations and then you've got to lay the foundations. And that's a costly and painful exercise that nobody likes going through. So the best thing is find this balance, make sure that your roadmap covers this balance of what are these foundational activities that I need, like you mentioned, the data literacy, the knowledge management, etc., but keeping the focus on the value that we're generating, and don't put the focus on the foundational disciplines. The foundational disciplines have to support the value generating initiatives on the roadmap.
Good. So you almost carry those things along as a burden on maybe a sprint or a use case or an iteration. You're going to carry some of that on each deliverable or each initiative that you set up.
That's it, exactly. And then it's got to focus on that group of people in the organization that get impacted by that, right? So broad strokes, covering 5,000 people in a data literacy program. Look, if you're a huge bank in the US and you've got this amount of money to spend, then by all means go for it, right? But if you're an average traditional organization and you've got very limited resources and budget to do this, make sure that you're very focused with that. So you've got an initiative coming up, think about those foundational things that you need and only spend the money that you need over there. So you don't slow down the initiative.
Right.
You generate the value as quickly as possible, but you also know that in the long term, you'll be able to sustain that value.
Fantastic. So it's almost like just in time surrounding needs.
That's it. Exactly.
When
Otherwise, you're just going to annoy the executive team.
And you're going to bring in a whole lot of governance and stuff around as well. Fantastic. Okay, Zjaen, maybe for your side, what are some of the common misconceptions, barriers, and challenges that companies face when it comes to adopting analytics?
Cool. Thanks, Howard. I think I'm going to add on to what Cole mentioned there. I think.
Okay.
I mean, it's the two bits. It's an extension of the same question, but I think it's sort of the misconception that quick and dirty is a good idea, and that it's sustainable and scalable. I think that's the big problem. I mean, we were early on in our careers when we had a lot of data scientists in our teams and sort of literally rocket science. We literally had rocket scientists in the team and biochemists and people with all sorts of PhDs. We could build things very quickly, but it never scaled. There was never scale for it. And it's, for instance, you would develop a dashboard, but next month if they want the data, then it's a very slow process to get the information out of them and. So it's not really sustainable, but it's more of a good ad hoc thing, if you want to do some exploratory stuff. And I think many companies miss that. And the challenges that they have is they don't cater for scale upfront. Before, it's all good and well to say you've got these brilliant resources, but if you want something sustainably out of them, you can't expect them to give something out, in 3 days, tune it out. And then that thing is just going to automatically run. Sometimes they, more often than not, they had to manually source the data. It was a tedious process. It wasn't necessarily fun to get to that point. I think that's the first sort of challenge and barrier that companies have is they sort of want to bring in the A-class teams and then they want to play little league football. I mean, it's not necessarily fit for purpose. I think the second part of this is to not just quickly generate value from data, but also to do it in a sustainable fashion, in which case your foundational stuff needs to be in there. You need to plan for scale. I mean, a good example to the data literacy thing is, for years I've been trying to push data literacy into organizations and we were never successful, but there was a reason for it, right? We never linked that to value. It was something that we felt is important. And for us, it made sense. It made sense that if people knew if they capture the right data in the storefronts and the call centers, etc., then the business value upstream would be great. But we never communicated in that way. We came with the message to say your people are illiterate. We need to train them, and we never got that breakthrough. But those are typically things that you need to focus on, and we do cover that in a lot of detail within the book to say, don't get lost in the buzzwords and the fads and the hypes and these type of things, but focus on the things that really truly add value and scrutinize those things and make sure that only the right things goes into that process. Because everything is nice to do, but not everything, unfortunately, adds value at the end of the day. And like Cole said, is once you've built a house, to strip that thing down to replace the foundations is not as easy as one would expect, and then you end up with multiple vendors and multiple teams and outsourced IT.
Right.
It's just chaos.
Howard, Kira's got a great question on that same issue, the buzzwords issue, right? I don't know if everybody can see that question, but I think a lot of the time data leaders are being faced with these buzzwords, and there's two sides to that, right? It's the pressure that business people face in order to look like they're moving forward, and then it's the pressure that data analytics leaders face to look like they're keeping up with technology, right?
Yeah.
There's one common foundation here that overrides all of that, and that's value, right?
Yeah.
So whether you're getting pushed into that corner or not, if you go and sit in front of your CEO and your CFO, the only thing they're going to care about is value, right? So if you can bring that pressure that you're facing, if you're a data leader, or if you're a business leader and you're placing that pressure, or you're facing that pressure, condense that back to value, and you should see that pressure kind of dissipates, right? Because now you're asking the right question. And the book it covers, I think it's in chapter 7, around the issue of technology specifically. It's a chapter on technology that's written for business leaders. Because often business leaders are pushed into this corner with software vendors or cloud platform vendors pushing them to make decisions, and they're completely disarmed, right? So they're trusting their vendors, salespeople, as their advisors, and then they wonder why a year down the line we spent so much money on something that didn't yield value, right? So the framework covers what it is. What are those questions that you've got to ask as a business leader in that vendor meeting that's going to make the software vendor move a little bit in his chair because he's not quite prepared for what's coming here. But that's what the goal is to lift up business leaders to become data confident so that they can hold their own in a conversation like that and not be dictated to, but at the same time give the data analytics leaders the tools to be able to communicate correctly with the business leaders. And when you do that, you're going to have a much more productive relationship.
And I'm assuming that as part of that communication, if as an analytics leader you see, there's Gen AI and Chat GPT, one of the things that would be helpful is to because you've got a list of the business requirements and the things, you can start saying, well, these are the things that technology enables, and so if you front foot on that, then they won't be trying to grab on silver bullets in the background.
That's it. Exactly. Link it to a strategic imperative. Make sure the value is very clear. Then go for it. Go balls to the wall with whatever technology suits and makes that project successful, right? It's not about the technology. You can do a lot of value just through a simple spreadsheet if you face it. If you're answering the business question and helping to create some value. And I think this is where data analytics people can be quite constrained, is that we believe that our purpose is to build dashboards that can automate insights, right? Whereas the business that's not what they're really after. What they're after is help me to retain this customer, help me to identify what's going on here, and then find a solution to solve that problem, right? And sometimes that means as data analytics people, we've got to roll up our sleeves a little bit, get a little bit out of our comfort zone, kind of get a hard hat on, go down into the mine and find out what's going on, right? And then develop your insight and your view of how the business works, because you'll be much more equipped then to be able to build solutions that can then be automated according to this newfound knowledge that you have.
Fantastic. And I think you used the word business savvy or finance savvy in the description of exactly what you're saying here, is that we need to learn. They don't need to learn just data literacy. We need to learn business literacy and finance literacy to be able to understand. Fantastic. That leads us on to the next question and maybe, Carl, this is great for you to start, is what is the significance of the relationship between the CDAO and the CFO? Coming from that background, you must have, I think, in a way, you're fortunate. Sometimes when I walk in with accountants trust accountants.
Yeah.
So there's a level of trust that you have, and coming in as a non-accountant, that's not as easy.
For sure. It's always been an advantage in my career working with CFOs, because you immediately have this trust foundation. But the reason why this relationship is so important and why we explore it quite extensively in the book is because based on some research that we did and what Gartner said very recently, is that organizations that can get that relationship right, the relationship between the CDIO and the CFO, are going to have an edge in terms of using data as a strategic value driver going forward, right? So it's really something that organizations, and if you're on the call today and you're a CFO, you need to pay attention to this, because you have to push from your side to build the relationship with your CDIO. And if you're a CDIO or CDO or head of data, whatever we call it, right, there's many different names, but you get the idea. If you're a head in the data space, you have to work at getting that relationship with your CFO working. The challenge is that these two roles don't generally get together because their agendas seem so far apart from each other. The one wants to see value, the other one wants to invest in innovation and all sorts of other things. And so there's usually this clash, right? And they don't tend to talk the same language. So what we did in the book is we created two of the frameworks. So RAPPID stands for 6 different letters, but two of the frameworks are the 5 R's, which is for investing in insights, and the IF-MAPPI framework, which is for recognizing value. So that's the R and the I in RAPPID. And what these two frameworks, when you put them together, and you can forget the arrows, don't worry about that. This is actually the map you follow when you're investing for the first time. But the idea is that those 5 R's, the readiness, the ringleader, the roadmap, the ROI, the results, when the CDAO is, when the CFO can build the confidence to invest, right? So he knows what the ROI is going to be. He can clearly see it. It's determinate value. Then that confidence lifts and it makes the relationship a lot easier because now I can invest confidently. Instead of going, we're not sure, but we know we have to invest, so we're going to do it anyway, right? The IF-MAPPI framework is the converse. It's the requirement, or it lights up the requirements and the capability for the CDIO to now report on that value generated. So what you get is you get this healthy relationship where when the CDIO needs money and investment, there's a mechanism to do that through the 5 R's. And when there's now that the value is being generated, there's a mechanism to come back and report on that value. And that makes the CFO happy because he's seeing ROI, or he's seeing when there isn't ROI, and then something can be done to fix that. That's why the last letter there in the IF-MAPPI framework is improve value. So we need to monitor and then continue improving. And then the CDAO is also happy now because he actually has a mechanism to pull investment, and he can track for himself then what is this value that we're actually generating, which creates a much healthier relationship than what many organizations have now.
Yeah. Zjaen, anything from your side?
Yeah, no, I've got nothing to add on this one. I think Carl has covered it in quite a lot of detail. I think what is important to note, maybe, and you'll pick this up as a trend, is we have a framework or a couple of frameworks per chapter. And the main reason for that is typically your business leaders have gone to business school and they have a framework for everything. So we've given them frameworks for everything to simplify it and make it a lot easier to consume.
Fantastic. And I know, Carl, I know in the DMBOK and stuff, we talk about a guiding coalition. And I'm assuming that relationship is almost your primary two that you need. And then, of course, you can add on others that get it, but those two have to be there. Otherwise, you're probably going to fail.
That's it, because the CEO is always going to look in that investment approval discussion. CDIO is asking for, I don't know, $5 million to build this pricing mix optimization or whatever. The CEO is always going to look at the CFO first and say, do you feel comfortable that we invest this, right? So the CFO is always the main customer when it comes to investing in data analytics. And so you have to have this methodical approach, because in general, we've seen that investment cases or business cases in the data space can be weak at best. right? And boards are often making, or excos are often making decisions based on pretty weak business cases, which has downstream impact, right? It's not necessarily a bad thing to take a chance as a business, but the problem is if you don't know what you're getting into up front, you won't be able to measure whether you're successful further down the line.
And I've actually been in an engagement with one of the top banks in Saudi, and I was talking to the CFO, and her comment was, "I do not know where data people get their data for the business case. Tell me where it comes from, because whatever I've seen, it's nowhere what it's going to cost and what we get at the end of the day." So it's helpful to give them part of that responsibility.
Yeah.
Excellent. Zjaen, from your side, can you explain the concept? You've mentioned it a few times of data confidence, and why is it so important?
Yeah, so I think we're introducing a lot of new terms in this book, and hopefully it doesn't confuse people or maybe people too much. But I mean, if you look at the concept of data confidence, it almost, for me, it's sort of two sides to the same coin. I think, I mean, it's maybe to set the scene is if you look at, so for instance, if you have any other executive sitting in a boardroom and, people are throwing around things like ROI and EBITDA and all these other acronyms and business speak, if you don't know what those things mean, you don't effectively belong in that boardroom, right? And it takes time to sort of become au fait with these things and to understand them and understand, sort of cost drivers versus capitalization and all these other things as well. And over time, people gain confidence, and the more confidence they have, the more confidently they can use these levers, to bring the business forward and to sort of modernize or transform or whatever you want to call it. I think the same thing applies to sort of the data leaders, is for them to become data value savvy to a great extent, to understand that, and this is now business leaders as well as data leaders, is they need to understand that it's about value. And I think we've mentioned that this a couple of times. If it comes down to value, the conversation changes. Now, if you're a data confident business leader, we would expect you to do two things. One is to have confidence in the data that you have access to, and this is around the people and the platform and the processes and all the things, but also the confidence in using that data in such a way that you can derive value from it for your business. Which means is they need to have a sense of let's call it data literacy, but it's more around using data value as a point of departure rather than just understanding the concept of data. And if they do that effectively and they gain confidence in terms of how they can use data to drive their organizations, we expect them to increase the value thereof quite significantly. And this is sort of when you have a data-led strategy in most business. So I mean, there's a lot of fights at this point in time in the community around should you have a data strategy or a data-focused business strategy or a business strategy that consumes data, whatever it might be. But irrespective, if you're combining data and business, you need a data-confident leader to help you sort of push that stuff forward. And that's the leaders that we want to enable. That's sort of, we want to give people the tools and the mechanisms and the approaches and the methodology of RAPPID so that they can be confident in the use of data, but also use data confidently to unlock value.
Yeah, I also just want to add this story that we include in the book. I recently spoke to, I don't know if anybody knows Brett Sinclair. You know him.
He was speaking, I think he moved from South Africa, didn't he? He was.
Yeah, he's based in the UK. I actually had a call with him last week, checking if I can use his quote in the book.
Right.
So I met him some years ago, probably about 5 years ago, and he mentioned something to me that I'll never forget because he did some time at Google a number of years before I met him. And what he said was that something that was interesting about Google is that every business leader, whether you were a financial manager, whether you were involved in marketing, whether you were in operations, it didn't matter which area of the business you were in, you had OKRs on your plan for that year to implement machine learning, AI, whatever it is, some automation, etc. Right? And if you came into that organization with a lack of data confidence, you wouldn't last for long, because you'd be called out in the first meeting you entered everybody, regardless of role, had data confidence or has data confidence.
Yeah.
And he goes into more detail where he talks about the obsession around data at Google, for example, where things are not just measured, on the face of it, but there's always double and triple checks because there's the bias that comes with analytics, etc. So they go to extensive measures to make sure that they can rely on the results they're looking at, because a lot of big decisions. But if you look at the trajectory of Google and its growth, you can see how that pays off. When every leader in the business is a data confident leader and they can hold their own in any conversation, right from the board meeting, right down to management meetings or whatever, about data as a value driver for the organization.
And I think a lot of the times you're going to be teaching them with each initiative, you're going to be teaching them in terms of, yes, you used to make this decision maybe based on gut feeling. Now you have data. How does that impact your decision making? And they're going to develop the confidence over time. It's not just going to be there and they're going to trust you, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we're running a little bit out of time, so I'm gonna go on to more of your methodology. So in the book, you're talking about RAPPID methodology and several frameworks in the methodology. Can you explain the RAPPID methodology and its components? And I think we did a little bit of that, Zjaen. I don't know if you want to elaborate some more.
Yeah, let me perhaps share this just as a view. It's going to be small, so. But
nice.
I'm assuming everybody will buy the book, and then you will have a nice, decent view of this. But effectively, what we've done is we've structured the chapters in such a way that speak to this RAPPID methodology, and it's quite interesting. Sort of where we came to this point was we took all the things that what is it that you need to really get to that point of optimizing your environment, getting yourself ready, increasing that confidence that we're speaking about, truly leveraging people and all those type of things. And it was a mishmash of words. And at that stage, we already had sort of the loose book title, which is still work in progress, around acceleration or accelerating the data value confidently. And we said, well, let's look at something. And within 5 minutes, we came up with RAPPID. The only way to do it, accelerate it, is to do it rapidly. It expands a bit beyond what we came to know from people, platform, and process. We introduce some additional concepts within that, right? So the methodology starts out with that concept around, how do you truly recognize value, and that's where we have the IFMAPI framework that we're introducing around, how do you identify value, forecast value, etc. So that the concept of value is instilled at the beginning of the book, because this is the golden thread that goes throughout everything else. From there on, then you move into the approach to delivering insights. So this is now what are the things that needs to go in there, and then obviously there we have quite a lot of things that come into play, right? So we spoke, or we've mentioned in the book, we're speaking about the scrap pad framework, the driver framework, and the data breach. But effectively, this is, how do you install a standard way of doing things, repeatable, so that you from day one cater for scale and sort of the increase thereof, and make sure that it's sustainable, so that if you follow this process, and even from a business leader, focusing on the components of this process and testing your teams to make sure that they're following a formal process, helps quite a lot, right? So this then carries through the rest of the book. We see is if you follow these formal approaches towards value, and managing your data end-to-end, sort of that value stream, your people operate a lot more effectively, right? So you will be able to reduce things like key man dependencies and things that you'll typically see. You'll also see that we've listed that under people, data, and data value culture. It helps you managing your platforms a lot better, because you now have a formal way of work, so that's repeatable. So if you do manage to lose people, it's easy to bring new people in to carry on with that value generation, specifically because this environment is highly volatile. So that's approach. Then we move on to people and data value culture. So this is sort of, as a business leader, what are the things that you need to focus on? We've joked about this quite a lot. So when you read the book, it speaks about we or you. The you is not always just the CFO or the CEO. Sometimes it also includes the CDO and a call to action in terms of what we're expecting from them, from the CDO or the CDIO, around how do you structure those teams to make sure that you're getting the right value out of them? How do you train people up? And this is now the business training as well as the data training. How do you attract new talent? How do you capacitate them? How do you make sure that you reduce key man dependencies? Again, that ties back quite strongly to the approach. How do you enable these teams? I mean, it's one of the most horrible things that I have experienced in my own career multiple times, is you have this wonderful teams, you've got the platforms, and then you just don't get any support from the top, right? You don't get the mandate.
Right.
You're running from pillar to post to try and find data, but Exco is expecting dashboards and reports and insights, and you're not getting information. So what role can senior business leaders play in the enablement of those teams? And then obviously also, what are the mechanisms around retention? And believe it or not, I think one of the key things is, again, approach, is if you have a formal approach and you manage the demand and things in such a way, you will not find yourself in a situation where your teams are overwhelmed or whatever the situation might be, because you as business leader, actively involved in that process. Then we go up to the platform, and this is the interesting one, right? So it's a technology-based chapter in a book about data value, but it's aimed at senior business leaders. So if you're a data leader reading the book, and you're going to hear a lot of fancy stuff around data mesh and data fabric and data vault and those things, I think we do mention like 3 bullet points or 4 bullet points in the chapter, but it's more predominantly around how do business leaders temper test their teams and those business cases that they put in front of them, and to make sure that when they do make an investment, that it is obviously scalable, it's sustainable for the business, and that they don't sort of get caught up in the whole mess around buzzwords and all those type of things. I mean, it's a lot of the new technologies do add value, but it needs to be fit for purpose. So there we looked at how do you adapt those things, how do you maintain cost management is a big thing these days, specifically a lot of people moving to cloud, and now all of a sudden you're paying 5 times more because you don't know how costing works. Controlling that environment, collaboration between teams to reduce silos, making sure that you've got reliable platforms, things that doesn't just fail every 5 minutes, specifically if it's something that's now becoming a value enabler for you. And then we're going into that investing insights, the 5 R's framework. And I think the important bit here is sort of that checklist. If you don't have those things, it's going to be very difficult to convince someone to invest in insights. And for me, the main one there is that, are you ready for this? But yes, do you have a ringleader or not, right? So do you have somebody that can actually come to the party and support you through that process? And then lastly, this was a very painful chapter for us to write and to get to a proper acronym that we can use for the framework, but it's around data trust. And we finally settled on breathe, right? So just breathe. It's going to be fine. Just breathe. And sort of the things that then fits in there. And for us, in that context, it talks about things around the business context. So not just applying analytics or adopting things or buying out-of-the-box solutions, but how do you make sure that you apply your business context and what's important for you to the data and analytics so that it adds value for you, right? Relationships between data, but also around people. How do you elevate the data that you have and the trust thereof? How do you assign authority to things? So this talks a bit about the data ownership stuff that you'll see in the governance frameworks typically, and making sure that you have the right people working on that information. Transparency is a big thing. It's whatever you've done with your BR report, show me the calculations that you've done, so I know that I can trust this. Where we have a tendency, somebody talked about it the other day, and I thought we need to add this into the book before we print it. They talked about the watermelon dashboards, right? So it's all green and nice on the outside, like all the KPIs are green, all the measures are green, but once you start cutting into it, it is like really red. So that's a bit about the transparency, but then obviously just lastly around the health of data, and making sure that you're using healthy data within your organization. And what does that come down to? And obviously one of the key enablers of data health is obviously data quality. So that's just a high level overview of all the components. All of these ones are connected in some way, shape and form. They're interrelated. As you're reading through the book, you're going to find yourself jumping from one chapter to the next chapter. We obviously also at the beginning of the book make a recommendation of how you need to read the book, based on where you find yourself in that maturity journey. If you're sort of trying to break through that barrier and move into strategic, then there's a way in terms of how you can tackle the reading of the book.
Carl, anything from your side?
No, I think you did a great job with that.
Fantastic. Guys, we've sort of got to the end, and I'd like to maybe just close off before we open the session. Some people are leaving. Are there any surprises in the book that you'd like to share with the people in terms of what they may get, what they could get, any surprises?
Yeah, I think the nice Easter egg comes in the last chapter. I mean, there are many surprises, right? We've put a lot of thought and many years, not just between John and myself, but there's a whole team sitting behind this with hundreds of years of experience, a lot of beta readers that have contributed, criticized, helped us to improve and even change a lot of things. But I think the kind of Easter egg is in the last chapter, we address what so many organizations find as a major pain, which is, and especially data analytics functions. Zjaen and I have both been through this issue in our careers many times, but it addresses this issue that data analytics functions on their own can only add limited value. Right? Because the challenge is this, let's use an example. If you're doing something very simple with the call center, you're in a telco, for example, and you realize that your customer services team that are now accepting these incoming or inbound client service or customer service calls, they're now sitting on this call with a customer. The reality is this customer could be within the cancellation window of their contract, right? So let's say in the last 30 days of their contract. But what tends to happen, because the call center agent doesn't have that information at hand, they just end the call there. And then the retention process has to kick in a traditional way. There's a very low chance of actually getting through to that customer. And, there's a good likelihood you're probably going to lose that customer anyway. But just adding that little bit of information onto a dashboard, in front of the customer services agent, with a little red thing around it, if it says that it's within 30 days, gives that customer services agent the opportunity to transfer that call, just to say to the customer, listen, would you like to, I'm not a call center expert, so please, there's probably people on the call that are rolling their eyes. Right. That's not how you do it. But the opportunity there is to take action within the window of maximum value, right? So now I can transfer that call because I see it. Mr. Customer, would you like to chat to retentions? I see your contract's coming to an end. And if the customer says yes, there's a much higher likelihood of retaining that customer, right? So that's typical. There's no ML or AI involved in that, but you can create a lot of additional revenue just by putting that little bit of information on top of the existing dashboard. The problem with an initiative like that is it requires involvement from the data analytics function or a data engineering function to bring the right data from the right systems, because that number of days left on the contract is probably sitting in a contracting system that's different to the system that the call center agents are using. Then you need IT to come in and help you to make a change to that system, because they're typically the owners of these applications, right? Because face it, if the data analytics function just puts a dashboard up that says big red number, that's out of context, right? You have to put that in the context of the person that's actually executing the process. That's when analytics makes a big difference. And then you have to have the call center leaders on board, because this is something that they've got to adapt to and train people and things like that. So there's some effort that's going to be spent there. The problem is, if this initiative starts with the data analytics function, and they build the functionality to do that, and then they bring it along to IT and they say, we want you to implement this in the system, the IT leader goes, that's not on my OKRs. Yeah. That's not a priority for me. Then they go to the call center and they say, would you guys like us to implement? And they say, yeah, that's also not on our OKRs, right? So the last chapter in their book spins up a new a role, and some organizations already have this role. But this role is essentially, it's called a data value architect. And it's the purpose of the role is to make sure that alignment is there continuously for every priority initiative, so that none of the functions, whether it's the data analytics, IT, or business functions, will ever be caught on an island, because they know that they can go into battle doing these initiatives with this key role in place that ensures, it's basically 3 items in the data value assurance framework, which is the support. So leadership support has to be in place. The contracting, which means everybody has to agree that this is what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
And the delivery. So how do you actually go about making sure that these multi-functional initiatives follow a set approach that also aligns to the RAPPID framework or RAPPID methodology, which also becomes an interesting relationship because there's definitely overlap there. But the idea, and this is the benefit of the Easter egg for business leaders, it will assure the value of data analytics initiatives for you, which will reduce your failure rate by a huge percentage if you employ this role and you take advantage of that.
Fantastic. I really like that role, and I think it's quite an important one, and probably great from a business person to lead that. Or would you put a business person in there that's really business savvy and finance savvy, or would it be more technical?
Zjaen, we said, well,
it was a long debate, Howard, but I think convincing or changing a business person towards this role is not that difficult. I think the most important bit is the person needs to have a focus on value. So somebody with a financial background would be a really good individual to earmark for this. Mainly because they're also going to be held accountable against the CFO, right? So they need to speak their language, but they need to know enough to focus on value, right? So remember, their KPIs is not worried about, I need to implement these 5 things at a quarterly release on a Saturday evening. They're not involved. Like, their main thing is value, tracking the value, the components that they're expecting to be enabled for that value to be realized, and their main KPI is value enablement. So financial background definitely strong, and I mean it's definitely somebody that understands data and the value you can get out of it. The one thing that I just want to mention is this role. The proper thing that you need to do is to remain, or to make sure that that person remains independent. Many companies have this role reporting into their data function, which doesn't help because then they don't have the mandate. It needs to be somebody that's almost at the same level, operating at the same level as the rest of the C-suite, that sits in those conversations, that has a proper seat at the table. Right? All CDIs want a seat at the table. It's not necessarily going to happen, but your data value architect is going to be the person that's going to help you breach that gap and open up an opportunity for you to have a seat at the table. But yeah, I think I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of people changing their LinkedIn job descriptions in the next 2 years to data value architect. But then I'm expecting their CVs to showcase the value that they've realized for organizations.
Yeah, that's it.
And we give you a fair amount of detail in terms of what the expectation is of that role within that last chapter.
Nice. Interesting, because I actually spoke to a lady that her LinkedIn title was Data Value Expert. So, and I'd never seen that before. So nice. So just before everyone goes, we sort of 7 minutes past. Maybe I can just open it up to the floor. There is a question from Rendani. It says, as both of you have extended experience in the data space, where would you say the maturity level is at in organizations around data conversations as a critical topic? Is it now starting to be understood, or are we moving slowly?
So I studied with Rendani. So we did our 3rd year informatics project together. Thanks for joining the
All right.
Great to chat to you again. Zjaen and I, when we sat down and set some ground rules for writing the book, we actually agreed that we're not going to use the word maturity. I think maybe it slipped through once or twice, but we completely stayed away from it just because it's got this connotation, from large consulting firms of the 5 things, and then you pay $1 million for this consulting engagement, and all you get told is you're a 3.26 out of 5, or worse, right? You're 1.35 out of 5. What does that mean? What do I do to improve? And it's very foreign to me. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to flip the question a little bit. Instead of talking about maturity level, the question is actually, are organizations effectively generating value from their data, right? And the answer is absolutely not. We talk to organizations regularly, even some of the largest brands in the world, that struggled with the most basic BI issues. So never mind trying to do more advanced things like product mix analytics or revenue assurance stuff or customer churn or just starting to include analytics into existing products, right? There's a lot of opportunities to do these things, but if you hang up on just trying to keep the lights on and you can't even see what happened yesterday in the most basic issue in your business because you've got systems all over the place and then you haven't generated the discipline to bring that data together, your leadership's going to struggle to take that 2-3 steps forward that it takes, because it's a long distance to go from I can't even see what's going on right now to where I want to be in the future. And so that I think that there's the first thing is you got to build up these basic disciplines, identify those primary KPIs, at least measure them daily so that you know what's going on, like just have some basic information around. It's difficult to do that because it's indeterminate value, so you got to somehow measure that. There's actually a mechanism in the book that we write about that helps you to determine indeterminate value. Can you believe it? But there's a way you can do it. But you have to constantly think about the value of what you're generating. Otherwise, you're going to end up spending a couple $1 million here, and you're not going to be able to show the value for it very clearly. And so you're going to end up in a position where your value will be questioned, and that's not a happy place to be. And then maturity kicks in. Maturity just goes, let's drop, because then executives aren't excited to invest, and immediately the maturity falls flat.
Right. And there was a really nice article, I'll maybe share it with you, from Dr. Zjaen Coetzee, who recognized that the value of intangible assets, where they believe a lot of the data assets has been recorded, actually went down in South Africa, whereas in the US there was quite a big increase, but it was questionable in terms of what's actually happening in our local area. But yeah. Any other questions? Mark, I see you're referring to an interesting new role called Data Value Architect. Are you looking for that one, Mark Nolte?
Yeah, that struck me. That line, that title, that role. I like the idea. I mean, enough to have scanned the barcode. Now it's asking me questions. Maybe can I just read that chapter? Can you guys just send me the chapter about a little appetizer?
Mark, if you have an immediate need, reach out on LinkedIn and we can have a chat separately. It's you don't have to wait for the book.
Okay, cool. I will do. I wrote down. In fact, I was going to ask. Is it Zjaen? How do you say your name?
Zjaen, yeah.
Zjaen.
That was well done, by the way, Mark. Well done.
I know another Coetzee up here in Calgary works for Chevron, who does a lot of facility information management. Anyway, just I'm not going to ask you if you're related. You might be, but
I don't know. Probably.
Thanks, Mark. And Mr. Kennedy, I see you quite interested in that data confident leaders. Is there a question there? Is there something you'd like to share on it?
No, I think it's an excellent term, and it really positions where everybody should be. And I think that's why companies like Amazon and maybe Airbnb do so well, is because people have to pay attention to data, not just pay lip service to it.
That's it. Yeah, Zjaen put forward this brilliant piece in the book where he talks, there's pieces that Zjaen, created, pieces that I created. You put it all together, you get this book. But I distinctly remember Zjaen putting this forward as some of the text that we wanted to put in, where he says that you have this idea in businesses that when a financial manager becomes data confident, you automatically get a better financial manager. When a marketing manager becomes data confident, you automatically get a better marketing manager, right? So we had this previously, say 15 years ago, 20 years ago. This was very commonplace in businesses because you just had exactly the same concept just happening in IT, right? So what did we do? We had these financial managers that maybe couldn't really use, maybe it was more than 20 years ago, maybe 30 or 40 years ago, right? Financial managers that couldn't use PCs, and those that could we're better financial managers,
Yeah.
right? You now have exactly the same issue in data. And so it is to the benefit of every organization to develop data confident leaders, because they will automatically become better leaders and be able to generate more value.
And it's a whole lot better than calling them data illiterate.
Oh yeah, that's very it's negative, right? And literacy is another word that we try to avoid completely in the book. It's derogatory. But what are we trying to do in the business? We don't want to understand data better. We just want to make more money with it, right?
Correct.
So let's focus that on being data value savvy instead of data literate. And all of a sudden, because let's face it, guys, the CFO doesn't want to understand how to extract data and then do something with it. And they're really just looking at what do we need to do in order to create value here? Just help me to understand that, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a fit for purpose literacy that helps the whole organization lift up. And I wanted to say just one thing about these 1%ers that Zjaen mentioned. There's this big gap between these organizations that are succeeding and where everybody else finds themselves down here. And maybe Rendani, that also talks to your question about maturity, right? You just have this issue, and we have this really good story about an incident I had when I was 18 years old and I broke my nose. And I'm not going to give all the details away now. You got to get the book to you.
You need to read the book for that story. It's amazing.
That's it. But what it comes down to is that certain organizations have just got the cream of the crop in terms of data folk and business leaders that can just do this super well. And they're just shooting the lights out. If you look at the top 10 organizations globally in terms of market cap, 7 out of 10 of them are data-led organizations, and it won't be long until all 10, then the top 20, then the top 50 are all data-led organizations. This is not investment advice, but go have a look at the information yourself. And so you've got this gap now where traditional businesses are trying to keep up with something that they can't, because you just got a complete gap in the capability, right? Between a CFO at that level, CFO at this level, or marketing manager at that, etc. Right? And so what the book aims to do is to lift up this bottom cohort to a better place where at least we can play in the data game as well now. We can survive as a business and then hopefully thrive and develop a competitive edge.
And I think McKinsey had a really great thing in an article to say, good companies or the leading companies are making decisions promptly and well. They're not in major disagreement. They've got the data. They're in agreement. And I really like that view of where we want to try to get our data and decision making. Guys, any other questions? We haven't really opened up onto the floor. Is there anybody else that has 1 or 2 questions? I'm hoping that Carl and Zjaen can hang around for a little bit more. Are there any other questions before we close the session?
I'll comment that I like the topic. I did actually scan the QR code and answer the questions. You'll be happy I picked the highest price category for a business book. They're all expensive. They're all expensive, right? The good ones, right? Yeah, interesting. I'm curious about that chapter, and I will reach out. Because I bill myself as a data architect, but how do I differentiate in the sea of data architects? How do I evolve my own practice? How do I, to stand out from the crowd of people who think they're architects because they can write SQL?
I think it's a great thing for you, Mark. I think it's a great position to aim for.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mark. Are there any other questions? I can see people are leaving. Maybe any final comments from Zjaen or Carl? Anything you'd like to share with the guys before we go?
Yeah, just a last thought. So I think, it's a lot of these things that we speak about in the book might be complex. And it's one of the ways that we want to enable that is, so throughout the book, you'll find links to maturity/readiness assessments.
Yeah.
So sort of checking where you are, right? So it's these are not, you've done maturity assessments before and they told you you're immature, right? if you do our assessments, we will tell you how ready you are for adoption. What are the key things you need to look out for? It gives you practical advice in terms of how to move forward. It's not the pie in the sky, like Cole said, 1.5, 3 out of 5 scenarios. Yeah. It's tangible things with tangible steps throughout the entire book. And we urge everyone that sort of, if you purchase the book or share it with your seniors and business leaders, is to get them to complete those surveys, to get the information back around sort of where are you in terms of these things, how ready are you to recognize value. We're almost playing around with the concept of your propensity to profit from data to a greater extent. And then I think that sort of changes the world a bit, because we're not going to make money out of the book. We're probably going to give away a lot of free copies. But what we want to do is we want to level the playing field. That 1%ers are up there, they're doing their own thing. How do we get the rest of us into a level where we're all able to compete at the same level, right? Sort of the ground root stuff. And I think if you use the book as a business leader to do that, or if you use it as a data leader to help your business leaders to do that, I truly believe that we can make a big impact and not just get frustrated the whole time because we're not getting access to budgets as data leaders, or priorities get shifted down, or if projects get cancelled, ours is first in line. How do we change the conversations in the boardroom, not from data, but from the traditional things over to data value and the value that they can expect and that we can help them realize.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's very well said from Zjaen. I think the only thing I can add to that is just the reminder of this importance of the relationships in the boardroom, right?
Yeah.
And how if you have somebody that's very far along the journey and other people that aren't so far along the journey, you're going to create this divide, right?
Yeah.
So there's an opportunity here for executives together to go on a journey, to inform themselves about what this actually takes, right? To give their data analytics leaders a fighting chance, right? Because a lot of what they're facing, us being them, us knowing this game, a lot of what they're facing is really, really difficult because they're dealing with people that just don't know, they don't understand, right? So it is your responsibility as a business leader to improve your data confidence, get your group of leaders around you to do the same, and you'll immediately see how your business will start flying because you'll be able to address things in a very different way, much quicker, and everybody will be happier for it.
Right. And it's actually, you remind me of something that Tom Redman brought out, which is called a how do you make decisions quiz. Do you ask for more data? Do you have the data? And interesting things that they had specifically for the execs to go through and answer. So I like that idea. Okay, final thing, Zjaen, Karl, who would you identify as the person who asked the right or the important question? Anyone from your side?
I can't vote for Indani because I know him personally.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Yeah,
it'll be a conflict of interest. Zjaen, you go for it.
Yeah, I would have said that's a good one, but I think the one around the buzzwords and how do you sort of get past those buzzwords? That's a good question for me, and it's a good question for two reasons. One is it is a very real thing that's happening, and secondly is we give you the solution in the book. And there's something that you'll realize when you read through the book is we don't use the word AI that much, if at all, to a great extent, and there's a reason for it, right? So it's don't get stuck in the fancy stuff, get stuck in the things from value. So I think that question for me wins.
And that's Kiro. So Kiro, well done. I'm not sure if he's around. Yes, he is. Kiro, fantastic, great question. Thank you for that. Excellent. So we'll make a plan, Zjaen. If you as soon as you release, or we're able to get early access, we'll make sure that he gets a copy.
Yeah, and a signed copy. We'll make.
Yes, that's what I'm keen on. Yes,
copy. Yeah,
fantastic.
Not just a copy.
Thank you very much, cool. Guys. Thank you. Thanks everybody. Thanks for joining. it's really nice to see the book coming out. Zjaen, you've been talking about it for a while. It's great to see it out, and it's good to see you guys talking about it. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Howard. Thanks, everyone. Have a good
Cheers,
one.
everybody.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you
Howard.
very much.
Cheers, bye.
Cheers, man. Mr. Nolte, you've got a new position to aim for.
Yeah. Well, I just finished a contract with Suncor, the oil
Right.
company, last Friday. So I'm just debating. I want to do something new, something different. Like, so,
Yeah.
still data stuff.
Yeah. And if you are interested, I did a few webinars on data valuation models and methods, everything from infonomics, sort of Doug Laney, to Gartner, to T-Lads, that's Bill Scamosa. So it's nice to be able to compare a whole range and to be able to converse EDM Council, that you can converse on all of these different ways of measuring value and frameworks that you need to put in place.
Yes. Yeah, to be aware of them. I mean, I have the CMMI. I heard from Andrew Andrews in Australia that there is some outreach effort with the EDMC,
Yes.
which encourages me. On one hand, I think it's the competition, but on the other hand, they don't certify individuals. They certify companies. So if they stick to corporate certification and we stick to individual certification, I mean, Ron, our leader here in Calgary, did a year ago or maybe 2 years ago now, did a deeper dive into the camp to compare it to the DM bot.
Okay. I know I've done a high level one. So do we have access to that recording, or is it possible to get something?
He just I remember him talking about capability.
Anyway,
I just remember he went into that exercise. I don't remember why, but yes, I talk to Ron almost every day.
Fantastic.
So
Mark, thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, thanks. I'll see you tomorrow morning as well.
Cheers, everybody.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, bye.